She published my trauma and called it fiction. Then she thanked me in the acknowledgements. That's the moment I realized my sister had stolen my life, packaged it into a best-selling novel, and paraded it across every bookstore shelf like it was her story to tell. And somehow, she expected me to be grateful. My name is Julia. I'm 30 years old now, but for most of my life, I lived in someone else's shadow, my sister Natalie's. She was the golden girl, the perfect daughter. Class president, Ivy League graduate, published essayist by 22. To my parents, she was a walking miracle. And me? I was just the other one. I was the weird kid who stayed up painting in the garage, who scribbled in notebooks instead of going to prom. Every family gathering was a performance, with Natalie as the star and me as the backdrop they forgot to adjust. My mother used to tell people, "Natalie will change the world. Julia just needs time to find herself." I heard her say that once at a dinner party while I was setting the table. When I told them I wanted to go to art school, they laughed. Literally laughed. Dad said, "We're not wasting money on finger paints, Julia." Mom added, "You can draw on your lunch breaks at the bank." They refused to co-sign my student loans, but they wired Natalie $20,000 to support her creative sabbatical in Paris. I left home at 19 with a backpack, a half-finished portfolio, and $312 in my bank account. I crashed on a friend's couch for months, took 2 jobs, barista by morning, grocery cashier by night, and saved every dollar. I eventually scraped together enough to rent a tiny studio above a tattoo shop where the walls leaked and the heater wheezed like it was dying. But it was mine. I painted every night on the floor using leftover cardboard and $5 paint sets from the dollar store. Over time, things started to shift. I met a retired art professor who owned a quiet little gallery in the city. His name was Mr. Whitman, and he saw something in my work no one else ever had. He gave me a chance, my first group show, then a solo exhibition. People started noticing. My paintings sold. Slowly, my name found its way into art blogs, then local press. I wasn't famous, but I was surviving, living, healing. Then last week, I got a card in the mail, a formal invitation to the launch party of The Invisible Sister, Natalie's new novel. The title alone made my stomach turn. I almost threw it out, but something made me open it. On the back cover, in glossy print, was Natalie's smiling face, and a synopsis that stopped my breath. A story of 2 sisters, one bright, beloved, and destined for greatness. The other, quiet, forgotten, and aching for something she could never have. Love, attention, her own place in the world, page after page, line after line, was mine. My childhood, my rejection, my studio above the tattoo shop. Even Mr. Whitman was in there, renamed Mr. Whitaker. And at the end? To my dear sister Julia, who inspired this story more than she'll ever know. I sat on my kitchen floor for 2 hours, just staring at that line. She had taken my pain, my journey, and turned it into her masterpiece. She'd built her next success on my survival, and didn't even ask. She just took it. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she wanted to reach out. So I texted her. Me. "Hey, I got your invitation. Can we talk?" The reply came in less than a minute. Natalie. "Julia, so glad you saw it. I knew you'd love the book. We really need to take a photo together at the party. It'll boost the promo." Promo? She didn't care. Not about me, not about the truth, just about the optics. The story was never about honoring me. It was about using me. And that's when I made my decision. I was going to show up to that book launch, but not as her forgotten little sister, not as the invisible one. I was going to take the microphone and make sure everyone heard the real story. The night before the book launch, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, stomach twisting. Every few minutes, I replayed old memories I had buried deep. Mom rolling her eyes when I brought home a painting. Dad tearing up a gallery flyer I made for a high school art show. Natalie laughing behind her bedroom door with her friends, saying, Julia's probably finger painting her feelings again. I thought I had moved on. I thought success, even small, had been enough. But seeing my life in Natalie's book, warped, dramatized, and claimed, brought it all back. She hadn't just stolen my story. She was profiting off my pain, and I was done being quiet. The day of the launch, I arrived at the bookstore 10 minutes early. It was one of those trendy independent shops downtown, filled with string lights, folding chairs, and an obnoxiously large banner of Natalie's face hanging near the podium. She hadn't changed much. Still perfectly styled, still soaking up attention from the small crowd gathering around her. She spotted me instantly. "Julia!" she gasped, pulling me into a fake hug with one arm while posing for a selfie with the other. "I'm so glad you came. This is huge for both of us." "Both of us?" I forced a smile and pulled back. "Congrats on the book," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. She beamed. "Thanks. You know, people are obsessed with the story. It's just so raw, so emotional. They keep asking me where I found the inspiration." I blinked. "Did you tell them?" Natalie tilted her head. "I said it was based on someone I knew. But don't worry, I didn't name names." My jaw tightened. "No, you just used mine. My childhood. My trauma." She laughed like I was joking. "Oh, come on, Jules. It's fiction. Besides, you never did anything with it." That sentence. You never did anything with it. I was seconds away from losing it, but I held it together. Not here. Not yet. People began taking their seats. Natalie was ushered to the front by the event host. I sat in the second row, close enough to look her in the eye. She began her speech, thanking the crowd, gushing about the deeply personal journey of writing the book, and how sibling relationships are complicated, especially when one child feels left behind. She actually said that, with me sitting right there. The audience nodded thoughtfully. A few people dabbed at their eyes. I could barely breathe. And then came the Q&A. Someone raised their hand and asked what inspired the story. Natalie smiled. "Great question. I actually had a sister growing up. We were very close, but also very different. She struggled a lot, and I guess I always wished I could tell her story somehow. So this book is my way of honoring her." Honoring me? She had told the world I was broken, that I was unstable, that she had been the one who carried our family, while I disappeared into mental illness and self-isolation. It was too much. I stood up. "I have a question," I said, my voice loud and clear. Natalie's eyes widened. "Would you like to tell the audience how you got the details of your book?" I asked. "Or should I?" The room went still. "I'm Julia," I said, turning to face the crowd. "Natalie's sister, the one this book is about, the one she hasn't spoken to in 8 years. A murmur rippled through the room. Natalie opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. She didn't ask my permission. She didn't even warn me. She just took my journals, my private writing, and twisted them into a novel. She called it fiction, but every painful truth is real. Gasps echoed across the space. One woman in the back dropped her phone. Natalie stepped forward, flustered. "Julia, this isn't the time." "No?" I said. "Then when was the time to talk? Before or after you turned my grief into your publicity tour?" A security staff member moved toward me, probably thinking I was some heckler, but I held up a small brown notebook. "My original journals, the ones she stole, I brought them. Would anyone like to compare?" Natalie went pale. Her mouth opened and closed like she was underwater. And that's when a journalist in the front row raised his hand, pen already scribbling. "Miss, would you be open to an interview after this?" The interview request changed everything. The moment that journalist raised his hand and asked if I'd be open to talking, Natalie knew she'd lost control of the narrative. Her fake smile dropped, and for the first time in years, I saw panic in her eyes. I turned to the reporter and said, "Absolutely. I'd be happy to tell you the real story without the fiction." The crowd began to stir, people whispering, looking back and forth between us like they weren't sure who to believe. but I knew the truth, and I had the journals to prove it. Natalie stepped down from the podium, walking toward me like she still thought she could fix this. "Julia, please!" she hissed under her breath. "Don't do this here. Let's talk outside, privately." I didn't move. "Why? So you can twist that conversation into your next book, too?" People were filming now. I saw at least 3 phones pointed right at us. She noticed, too. Natalie's voice lowered into something colder. "You're making a scene." "No," I said calmly. "I'm correcting one." Before she could respond, I turned back to the audience. "Just so everyone knows, I never gave permission for this story to be told. The emotional sister in the novel? That was me. The neglect, the rejection, the breakdown she wrote about, those were mine. And she didn't even ask before turning my life into her launchpad. The Q&A was canceled. Security escorted Natalie to the back. I wasn't asked to leave, but I left anyway, followed closely by the journalist who had taken my contact info and promised to reach out the next morning. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up. I'd gone viral. Someone had uploaded the confrontation to TikTok, and the clip was already at 180,000 views. Comments flooded in, some calling me brave, others asking questions, and a few die-hard fans defending Natalie like she was some misunderstood artist. But most people? They were furious on my behalf. And Natalie? She was silent. For 2 full days, she didn't say a word. No apology, no statement, no attempt to explain. I knew her PR team was probably scrambling behind the scenes, trying to figure out how to spin this. On day 3, a box showed up at my studio apartment. No note, just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside were my old journals, the originals, not copies, not scanned pages. The real thing, including one I thought I'd lost years ago. She had them the entire time. I stared at the stack, my hands trembling with rage. That was my soul on paper, my private thoughts, my worst nights and hardest memories. She hadn't just borrowed them. She'd kept them, hidden them. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my phone and recorded a video. No makeup, no script. Just me, holding the journals. "I got these back today," I said. "My sister used them to write her best-selling novel. She never asked, never told me. And now she's quietly trying to return them. Like that makes it okay." I uploaded it to Instagram. It passed 1 million views overnight. By the end of the week, multiple outlets had picked up the story. Headlines like, "Author accused of exploiting sister's trauma," and "Real-life sister speaks out about book that stole her story," were everywhere. That's when Natalie finally called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was shaky. "Julia, I'm sorry. Please call me back. Everything's spiraling. My publisher wants to cancel the tour. People are asking questions I don't know how to answer. Just, please, let's talk." Talk? After everything? I almost deleted the message. But then an idea hit me. Something I hadn't considered before. I called the journalist back. "Hey," I said, my voice steady. "I think I'm ready to tell the full story now, but not just in an article. I want to write it, my version, every page, every truth." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Julia, are you saying you want to publish a book?" I smiled. I want to publish the book, the real one, the one she was never brave enough to write. Comment the number 1 if you want to see how Natalie reacts when I announce my book deal. Revenge, when done right, doesn't come in a single explosion. It comes in waves. Quiet, calculated. I wasn't just going to ruin Natalie's book launch. I was going to dismantle the identity she had built by feeding off my pain. And I had the perfect way to do it. Publicly and legally. The journalist I'd spoken to introduced me to a literary agent. After hearing my story and seeing the viral videos, he said, "You don't just have a story, Julia. You have the story, raw, authentic, and people already care. Let's do this." In 2 weeks, I had a publishing deal on the table. A real one. The book would be titled The Real Invisible Sister. Same font, same color palette, but with a shattered mirror on the cover, instead of a silhouetted girl in the background. My story. My words. No filter. I announced the book on my socials with a simple caption. Sometimes the story you thought was stolen needs to be told louder. The reaction was instant. Support poured in. Bookstores that had featured Natalie's novel quietly reached out to stock mine. A few even canceled her upcoming readings. I didn't gloat, publicly, but inside, I felt vindicated. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about reclaiming my voice. Then, I did something I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for. I called my parents. They picked up on the third ring. Mom's voice was cautious. "Julia, I'm writing a book," I said. "About everything, about me, about what it was like growing up in our house." There was a pause. Then a sigh. "You're not going to paint us as villains, are you?" "I'm going to tell the truth," I replied. Dad cut in, defensive. "That's not fair, Julia. We tried our best. You were always distant." "You made me distant," I said quietly. "When you celebrated Natalie and ignored me. When you told me art wasn't a real career. When you let her use my journals." "We didn't know she had them," Mom said. "But you knew she wrote a book about me," I snapped. "And you still went to her signings, still posted about how proud you were." They had no answer. I hung up. A week later, the first printed galleys of my book were sent to media outlets. And that's when Natalie cracked. She posted a statement online claiming I was exaggerating, that artistic license is not theft. She tried to play the victim. But no one was buying it anymore. Because here's the thing, I had receipts. Literally. I posted side-by-side screenshots of passages from my stolen journals and lines from Natalie's novel. I showed the dates. I showed her handwritten notes in the margins of my private notebooks. It wasn't just inspiration. It was plagiarism, dressed up as prose. And then came the final blow. Natalie's publisher, already under fire, launched a formal investigation. Reviewers began pulling down their 5-star ratings. Booktubers, booktokers, even professional critics all turned on her. She lost her book deal. Her tour was officially canceled. Her entire image, the strong, empathetic storyteller, collapsed in a matter of days. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came in an envelope. It was hand-delivered to my apartment. No return address. Inside was a letter, typed, cold. "If you go forward with the release of your book, I will be forced to reveal what really happened the night of December 12th, 2016. My heart dropped. Because that date, that was the night I had a panic attack so severe I ended up in the ER. Natalie was there. She was the one who drove me. She'd held my hand the whole time. Or so I'd believed. But now I wasn't sure what she meant by what really happened. Had she done something? Said something? Or was she bluffing, trying to manipulate me like she always had? I read the letter again, hands trembling. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was war. I stared at the letter for a long time. "If you go forward with the release of your book, I will be forced to reveal what really happened the night of December 12th, 2016. Natalie had crossed a line again. But this time, she wasn't stealing. She was threatening. And it almost worked. For a few days, I spiraled. I barely ate, barely slept. That night in 2016 was blurry in my memory. I had gone into full psychological collapse. Panic, sobbing, blacking out in the hallway. Natalie had been the only one there. Or so I thought. I dug through my old hard drives, phone backups, anything that might tell me what had really happened that night. And I found it. Buried in an old email archive. A voicemail. One I had saved and forgotten. It was from Mr. Whitman. He had called me the next morning after the ER visit. "Julia, sweetheart, Natalie dropped you off last night, but she didn't stay. The nurse said she told them you were drunk, uncooperative. I just wanted to check if you were okay. Call me when you're up." My blood ran cold. Natalie hadn't stayed with me like she claimed. She hadn't comforted me. She'd lied. To the hospital? to me, and later to her readers, when she painted herself as the supportive sister who pulled me from the edge. She'd left me alone, in one of the worst moments of my life. And worse, she'd used that night in her book to score sympathy points. So I made a decision. I called my lawyer. We drafted a formal statement and a cease and desist order. The statement explained that Natalie had fabricated significant portions of her book, had accessed and used my private journals without permission, and had issued threats to silence me. I attached the letter she sent, the voicemail, the page comparisons, all of it. We sent it to her publisher, to the press, and, strategically, to every major literary award board she had submitted to. And then I did one more thing. I posted the letter publicly, word for word, no edits. Within 24 hours, the reaction was volcanic. Natalie's agent dropped her. Her publisher announced a full retraction of her novel. Retailers pulled it from shelves. Every award nomination she had was revoked. And the worst blow? A formal ethics complaint was filed against her with the Authors Guild. Plagiarism, libel, intellectual property violation, and emotional abuse. But the part that broke her wasn't legal. It was the silence. She posted a rambling apology on Instagram. Comment sections were disabled. She tried to frame herself as someone who just wanted to share a beautiful story. But no one believed her anymore. She was uninvited from literary festivals. Podcast interviews were canceled. Even her verified badge disappeared. She wasn't a storyteller anymore. She was a cautionary tale. My book, The Real Invisible Sister, hit the bestseller list in its second week. Not because of drama, but because readers connected with it. It wasn't polished. It wasn't sensational. It was real. Honest. Mine. I used part of the book's proceeds to fund an art grant for young women from underserved communities, and I renamed the grant after the person who had first believed in me, the Whitman Fellowship. As for my parents, they tried to reach out again. This time, they were worried. "You've said too much," my mom whispered over the phone. "People are going to think we were bad parents." "They won't think it," I said. "They'll know." And I hung up. Some people say revenge is about getting even. But for me, it wasn't about balance. It was about clarity, about finally seeing myself outside of the shadows she cast. Natalie once said, "You'll never be someone without me." And now? I look in the mirror and smile, because I finally became someone the day I stopped needing her permission to speak. Comment the number 1 if you felt that twist and want to hear more stories like this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see what real revenge looks like. More is coming.